Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
So I do want to ask you a political question about this, even though I see it primarily as a health issue. There's been a lot of unfortunate rhetoric on the left and on the right about the coronavirus. I want you to take a listen to something that the president's son, Don Jr., said about Democrats and the coronavirus just on Friday.
Anything that they can use to try to hurt Trump, they will. But for them to try to take a pandemic and seemingly hope that it comes here and kills millions of people so that they could end Donald Trump's streak of winning is a new level of sickness.
Can we agree that neither Democrats nor Republicans want Americans to get the coronavirus and die from it? I mean, that does seem like it seems like very extreme rhetoric. I don't expect you to criticize the president's son, but you don't think that Democrats want people to contract this disease, do you?
Well, I think what the president said earlier this week, and his charge to me, is to remind the American people that the risk is low, to assure the American people that we're ready, but also to say, as the president said, this is no time for politics. And frankly, I think that was Don Jr.'s point, that there has been some very strong rhetoric directed at the president by some members of Congress and
you don't think that was strong rhetoric?
Well,
you said seemingly Democrats want millions of Americans to die of coronavirus.
But responding to the kind of things that have been hurled is understandable. But what the president's charged us to do, in my conversations with Speaker Pelosi, with Senator Schumer, my conversations with Republican and Democrat governors, is to set the politics aside on this and to work the problem. And I want to assure you, viewers, that's exactly what we're doing. And with the exception of some barbs being thrown by some of the predictable voices in the public debate on the left, the usual shots the president will take.
I've heard some from the right also, with respect, sir. I've heard some, not from you, but I've heard some from the right.
Well, look, what I'm telling you is that this is really a time for us to come together. Because remember, we're talking about the health and lives of the American people. You know, I spoke on the phone last night to Jerry Goldman. She is the wife of Carl Goldman. And I caught her on a great night because she'd just gotten a blood test back. She'd been in quarantine for several weeks. She got a clean bill of health. She's going home, back to their small business. And she told me Carl's doing great, but he's still got a ways to go before they allow him to go on home and be back in his community. I mean, we're talking about real Americans dealing with the coronavirus. And I think it really is a time. It really is a time for us to look for ways to come together. And I have to tell you, Jake, the conversations that I'm having with leaders in the Congress, the conversations I'm having with, frankly, Democrat and Republican governors around the country, gives me great hope that as we move forward, and in the wake of the tragic news of this weekend of the loss of an American life, I continue to believe that we have an opportunity to come together to make sure all of our agencies have the resources that they need, all of our states have the resources that they need, and with the proper expertise, the proper resources, and the prayers of millions of Americans, we're going to get through this.
Lots to get to, but first, as this morning's Los Angeles Times says, Saturday's news of the first U.S. death from the coronavirus marks a turning point in the United States. Television screens are filled with maps like this one showing the virus spreading around the world. But let's remember that fear is a virus too, and it can be just as damaging. News outlets have a really important job to do right now, conveying accurate information. And part of the job is to tamp down on undue fears. Unfortunately, this virus has infected the political arena in ways that are truly jaw-dropping. Pro-Trump media stars are defending Trump's handling of the outbreak by accusing news outlets, I can't even believe, they're accusing news outlets of rooting for the virus. Watch.
It looks like the coronavirus being weaponized as yet another element to bring down Donald Trump.
Recent Presidential Medal of Freedom recipient Rush Limbaugh, one of many cooking up partisan conspiracy theories about the coronavirus. Chief among them, it's the news media's fault.
They think this is going to be what brings down the president. That's what this is all about.
Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney making the shocking claim that the media is somehow using the virus to take down Trump. Mulvaney picking up right where Fox's Sean Hannity left off, blaming Democrats for making this political.
Sadly politicizing and actually weaponizing an infectious disease in what is basically just the latest effort to bludgeon President Trump.
These talking points are bouncing back and forth between the Trumps and their TV surrogates, portraying the president as the victim in chief, and going so far as to say the president's perceived enemies actually want people to die.
Anything that they can use to try to hurt Trump, they will. But for them to try to take a pandemic and seemingly hope that it comes here and kills millions of people so that they could end Donald Trump's streak of winning is a new level of sickness.
This is not the first time the Trump machine has conjured up a conspiracy narrative full of misinformation and fear-mongering. But this time, the backdrop is a public health emergency. Still, irresponsible claims abound.
Now, I want to tell you the truth about the coronavirus. Yeah, I'm dead right on this. The coronavirus is the common cold, folks.
Experts have debunked that. But it's all part of a Trump defense strategy, fighting a virus by playing politics. And the thing is, this virus has no idea what political party anybody is in. It doesn't care. It's a nonpartisan illness. But it's spreading in a partisan war.
It is Monday, the 2nd of March of 2020. And you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam, and our daily special is River City Hash Mondays. Another weekend in which we take all that we had over the weekend, dice it, slice it, mix it up, and we make a fabulous gourmet dish for you. Yeah, I know it's leftovers, but that's what everybody does. What do you think the Blue Plate Special is the Blue Plate Special for? Huh? Well, now that you know that secret. Oh, hey, did you know that the coronavirus is a hoax and it's the Democrats that, really want to infect people with the coronavirus, and they call it the coronavirus, which is only a virus that gives you the cold, so don't worry. God. But yeah, we're going to infect people, and also we are also stupid enough to get the coronavirus in blue states. And they call it the coronavirus because it is the coronavirus, the kind that gives you the common cold, so don't worry. They'll say that over and over and over and over and over and over. But the coronavirus? The coronavirus? No. COVID-19 doesn't care about your propaganda. COVID-19 doesn't care about your lying. COVID-19 does not care about your political posturing. And COVID-19 does not care about your march to fascism. COVID-19 will get you sick. And it might even kill you. We're getting deaths. How many have died that we don't know about? Do you trust this administration to tell us the truth about how many people are dying? Please. They can't even tell you the truth about how many people are infected. Everybody's supposed to get well until that old folks home in Washington State. 50 plus people infected. One guy's already dead. And 20 of the 30 staff are now sick from COVID-19. But no, according to Trump, everybody's getting well, and when the weather warms up, it's going to get worse. It does not kill COVID-19. Has anybody ever heard of a summer cold? Please. My goodness. Yeah, I know coronavirus gives you the common cold, but COVID-19 can kill you. This is what happens when you have too many people thinking that homeschooling is better than, a proper education. This is what happens when a bunch of religious zealots, and there's not very many of them in terms of their zealotry, but the loudest voices in the room, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and the grease in this sense to shut them up, is to basically say, okay, we'll get rid of science and you can talk about your sky god. I'm not talking about teaching Jesus love. They won't do that. But they will pray away a virus that... What was the first thing Pence did when he convened this panel of experts, lobbyists, by the way, to figure out a plan on this pandemic? What was the first thing they did? Prayed for God to take it away. Sorry, God gave it to us, and we are supposed to have the volition. Look that one up, kids. Volition. Now, when I say kids, I'm talking about you Christo-fascists out there who keep attacking me. Ignorant fools. And you Trump brats, too. We'll get to you in just a moment. We are supposed to be imbued by our Maker with volition to figure it out ourselves. We don't sit on our butts and expect God to do the work. They don't call it good works because God's doing it. Yeah. All right. So we have a lot of news about COVID-19 and test kits and the lack of them and being defective because of a manufacturing defect. And we've got a little bit of news about, all sorts of other things are happening in the world that happen to do with climate. Pandemics of biblical proportions now, too. It's not just, sickness, disease. Yeah, we got pestilence coming also. Just around the corner. In fact, it's not just around the corner. It's right in the front door. Well, let me talk a little bit about Eddie Gallagher on 60 Minutes last night. Why don't they just do Himmler next? Let's sugar up that guy's image. What the hell has 60 Minutes become? Investigative journalism? Jeez, it's a Sunday morning show. It's a week morning show. Today with Eddie Gallagher, he'll show you the knife that he slit a 16-year-old's throat with. Isn't that nice? He's such a hero. And then we are lied to constantly. Now let me get to these Trump brats that have inundated the Facebook pages just like they do whenever there's something, like an election. And these Trump brats are not just bots, though there are some out there. And they aren't just trolls. They are the common variety Trump brat, waving their dicks in everybody's faces. And then when they wave their dick in your face and you say, quit waving your dick in my face, they'll claim, well, wow, you're laying in wait, just waiting for me to wave my dick in your face. What's wrong with you? Like that's supposed to work. All right, we're in for it. And for my part, I'm not going to just let him have it. And I'm not being baited into some sort of in-kind response. You don't need to give them an in-kind response. They would never back up what they threaten. And the few that would, well, I guess that's just written by God then, isn't it? We have no choice. Yeah, we have a big choice. We have volition. And part of that volition is, I don't know, making certain authorities aware, I'm brown-nosing cops now? Yeah, Trump brat. Yeah, we were talking a little bit about, just a little bit about gun control. about carrying, because a Trump brat has to go out there and stir the pot up. On these Facebook community pages, we're having scores of them now. There was one on a local community page that I'm familiar with, a page that I don't post politics anymore, because every time you do, you get suspended if you're a liberal. Comment on a Trump brat's post about how messed up the world is, or it's all Obama's fault. Post something contrary to that, you will be suspended. And it happens enough, and you get piled on by these people who will just come out and say, I recognize you. Like, sort of like an intimidation. And then they claim, where did I ever intimidate you? I just said I recognize you. How is that intimidation? Yeah, well, constantly the invitations for a little tete-a-tete in public. You tell me that I'm a wimp to my face. I call anybody who has to carry a gun into Walmart or the diner or the pharmacy or to the coffee shop because they, I'll tell you why. They carry it because they're wimps. Anybody who needs a gun to feel safe at Walmart is a wimp. And, of course, the argument always goes to, well, I'm going to protect my house. How can you say that carrying is illegal? Of course it's legal. You're just a legal wimp. And no one ever talked about you protecting your house and merely protecting your house in the fashion that I suppose that you're legally afforded to. That's not being a wimp. That's protecting your house. People protecting their homes and their families are not wimps. They're protectors of home and hearth. But people, and I'm talking about you guys, who have to carry a gun to the coffee shop are doing it only to intimidate, only to wave your dick in everybody's face. And I know how many people are going to go up to a gun-toting idiot at the coffee shop and call him a wimp. Because the guy holding the gun determines what polite conversation is now, isn't it? But if you would like me to just, by happenstance, by providence, we might bump into each other and recognize each other, I might make a joke about you being a wimp. But I doubt very much, as I told this fool, you'll want to shake my hand afterwards. Because if you have the gun, you determine what polite conversation is now, isn't it? Now, I don't invite guns pointed at me and the trigger pulled. But I have had guns pointed at me, and I've been, I have to say, probably lucky the trigger was not pulled. And I must say it wasn't through any volition of my own that caused the trigger not to be pulled. Maybe it was providence. Maybe it was the glory of God's love and justice. But I know what it's like to have a gun pointed at me, and I know what it's like to have a gun fired, not at me, but nearby. I've had that experience quite a few times. Not just in the streets of America, but in real war zones. So, it's not something that is a surprise. And I know in the Wild West, the gunslinger who's like telling everybody he's a gunslinger is probably going to sling his gun at the slightest provocation. That's why they are wimps. And I don't care if you think that you're 6'3". I don't care. If you need a gun to go into Walmart to feel safe, that by definition means you're a wimp. All right. Trump brats are out there on force. Spamming, spewing just deluge of their BS. And it's only going to increase now, isn't it? Where did Trump get all that money? It wasn't just stealing from his inauguration. He has got so much money, they're trying all sorts of stuff. They're going to have a blimp fly over Trump land and other places, and that blimp has the capability in which you can email that blimp, and it'll dox you. Isn't that fun? Because they want to micro-target their voters. Where do they stand? So I suppose if you message the blimp, text the blimp, and you're a liberal and you're calling the blimp an idiot, yeah, they got you. They got what they need from you. They have so much money they get to try that out. Well, if you're Vlad sponsored, I would presume you have some funds at hand. Lots of funds at hand. You don't think Deripaska and Firtash are giving the money just to build factories now, do you? Do you? No, we don't. What's on the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy? Of course, at the top, Pence had to defend Don Jr.'s claim that Democrats want millions to die from COVID-19. But thank you, Brian Stelter, for hammering and ripping Fox and Limbaugh apart for turning that crisis into a political issue to protect Trump. See how they turn things around? They got Hannity and all the others, saying it's the Democrats that are turning this into a political issue because they hate Trump. Yeah, right. Reporting on Trump's ineptitude is not because people hate him. It's reporting on the guy's ineptitude because he's a mobster. Mobsters always play catch-up. Leaders always lead. Trump is a mobster. He's playing catch-up. And for some reason, his cult is so cultic that even in the face of a pandemic, they believe the orange face monster. I got to tell you one more time, orange face paint is not an effective mask against viral pandemics. He thinks it works for him. Don't do it yourself. Literally or figuratively. You'll be a lot safer. On the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Oh, did you know it's River City Hash Mondays? Well, I'm telling you it is. A federal judge ruled that Ken Cuccinelli was unlawfully appointed to lead the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services Agency, and all his actions must be rescinded. Well, I'm sure we'll be hearing from the Roberts Vichy Court what the law really says about that now, won't we? We will. Republican-controlled states make it really hard for college students to vote, because if college students vote, they tend not to vote Republican. So to the Republican, that means they're all brainwashed. And the U.S. has only 75,000 diagnostic kits for testing coronavirus available at the moment because of a manufacturing defect. After the break, we then move to the chef's table, where a warm winter means that for the first time in the history of German winemaking, the country's fabled vineyards will produce no ice wine. Oh, that golden syrupy stuff. It's good, and we're not going to have it for the first time. I wonder why. I really wonder how that could happen. And if the world is going to give you a viral pandemic, why not have swarms of locusts, too? All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. At the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the rightish of the page is our chat room link, monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the leftish of the chat room link, at the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, you'll hopefully notice our link to our Patreon page, and if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, your recurring contribution, say how about the cost of an espresso-type coffee drink once a month sent our way? Those funds sent to us once a month, we are able to stretch those dollars beyond compare because we have a lot of experience going on 9 years now. So Your generosity allows us to keep resisting as the founders originally intended. And we appreciate and thank you for your generosity. And I think I should implore you, keep it up. We need more. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, it is so simple. You go to @NetrootsRadio. Tom takes care of that. Thank you, Tom. I, of course, will take care of @JusticePutnam, but because who else would? I don't expect them to, but I do. And I also post the show notes and links diary on Daily Kos about 10 minutes before showtime and get that linked up on social media. Follow the show on Twitter @CookbookWest. And most importantly, pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever fine podcasts can be found mixed in with all the rest of us. Alrighty. Okay, these introductory rants have been going on longer and longer. I wonder what's happening. I've been accused of being an angry old man. I'm not that old. Well, actually I am. But hey, if you're going to be rhetorical, you need to have a retort to the rhetoric, don't you? Isn't it expected? All right, let's get into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Well, let me get back to the angry old man charge. Okay, you usually become an angry old man because you might have been part of the angry young men group demographic at a time when, you had war, pestilence, famine, women not being treated as equals, blacks not being treated as equals, Asians not being treated as equals, Latin people not being treated as equals. Pretty much anybody who's not white is not treated as an equal. Yeah, you get kind of pissed off about that over time, especially when you see the folly of it all. Well, call me an angry old man. But hey, I could have been a young Richard Burton at one time. This first offering here comes out of the Associated Press by Elliot Spaggett. A federal judge has ruled that Ken Cuccinelli was unlawfully appointed to lead the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services Agency and, as a result, lacked authority to give asylum seekers less time to prepare for initial screening interviews because Cuccinelli has already been proved in court to be a raving, ranting, xenophobic bigot. He's also the former Virginia Attorney General and an immigration hardliner, was named to a new position of Principal Deputy Director in June, which immediately made him acting director because Lee Francis Cisna had just resigned. The agency grants green cards and other visas and also oversees asylum officers. Oh, acting doesn't have to sit in front of a congressional panel to be vetted. He's not nominated, he's only acting, because Ken Cuccinelli has already been proved in court to be a raving, ranting, xenophobic bigot. U.S. District Judge Randolph Moss in Washington found Cuccinelli's appointment violated the Federal Vacancies Reform Act, a 1998 law governing who is eligible to lead federal agencies in an acting capacity. Cuccinelli, in an interview on Fox News, said that Donald Trump's administration would appeal the ruling and that his agency would take steps to try to prevent the invalidation of other decisions made under his tenure. The ruling issued yesterday, Sunday, was at odds with Trump's penchant for temporary appointments. At Homeland Security, Chad Wolf is acting secretary, and the heads of Customs and Border Protection, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and Citizenship and Immigration Services are also in acting roles. Well, let me count how many more there are. Oh, scores. All across the government. They're all acting. And I got to tell you, they're all bad actors, figuratively and literally. The ruling, the judge wrote that Cuccinelli did not qualify for exceptions for officials who want Senate approval for other positions or spent 90 days in the previous year at the agency. The administration's reading of the law would decimate this carefully crafted framework, Moss wrote in his 55-page ruling. The president would be relieved of responsibility and accountability for selecting acting officials, and the universe of those eligible to serve in an acting capacity would be vastly expanded. Moss, an appointee of President Barack Obama, oh, now that's the reason it's going to go to the Supreme Court, because of his inherent bias. He hates Trump. That's what they'll say. Well, he set aside a Cuccinelli directive to give asylum seekers less time to consult attorneys before an initial screening interview, but his decision applies only to the 5 Hondurans who sued. He did not address other Cuccinelli directions. Well, that's just a bridge too far. Those 5 Hondurans, you're going to give legal deference to them? You can't do this just when Stephen Miller got married. You know, his wife is working in the government. Well, she was working in the government before, but still, what a bunch of Nazis. Department of Homeland Security Heather Swift said, "We obviously disagree with the court's opinion and are looking more closely at it because they basically and essentially and always don't really give an F about the law, especially by a President Barack Obama appointee." Sands of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. Vanderbilt University student Will Newell wishes it was easier for college students like him to cast ballots in Tennessee, one of the 14 states holding a presidential primary on Super Tuesday. The campus has no locations for early voting, so students must visit an off-campus polling location to cast a ballot on Election Day. Did you know that Texas just closed a quarter of all their polling places today, and they're going to close some more? Yeah, when people vote, they usually don't vote Republican, so you got to keep them from voting at all. That's the way to love America. Newell drives, but worries that many students who don't have their own transportation won't make it to a precinct. He said some campus groups offer rides to students, but the university itself does not provide a shuttle. And in fact, some states make it illegal to drive someone to the polls. Isn't that nice? So neighborly. He supports a bill introduced in the Tennessee legislature that would require early voting locations at large colleges and universities in the state. That's not the only restriction working against college students in the state. Tennessee, where overall voter turnout is low, is among several states that does not allow a college student ID, but it does allow a handgun license. So if you're a student at Tennessee, go get yourself a gun license, and that's proper ID to vote here in America. As Democratic candidates seek a boost from young voters in 2020, their impact at the polls could be blunted in a number of states that make voting more difficult for college students. Those include laws related to voter IDs, residency requirements, and on-campus polling places. Critics say many of those laws are designed to dampen turnout among voters who typically lean Democratic. I hate to tell the Associated Press when they say, oh, well, you know, it's just critics, they say that. It's only been decided and judged in the courts for decades now. I wish the Associated Press would catch up. Anonymous worker bees bring us part of this last offering here in the Bistro Cafe at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and David Shepardson of Reuters brings us the other part of this last offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The U.S. has 75,000 diagnostic kits for testing coronavirus available at the moment, and will expand that number radically in coming weeks, Alex Azar said on This Week yesterday, Sunday. Do you believe him? They're going to radically expand that number so they have 75,000 in the whole country. That's going to be a pretty radical number. Azar told the program that surveillance testing of flu-like symptoms was already underway in key urban areas, including San Francisco, but he had hoped to expand such testing across the country as the U.S. scrambles to contain the fast-spreading epidemic. He said there was likely to be more community spreading of the virus in the United States, and it was uncertain how large the outbreak had become because mobsters always play catch-up and leaders will lead. The community transmission spread has been going on for quite a while now because of the ineptitude and the abject insanity of Donald Trump. Getting rid of the pandemic response group at the CDC because the black guy put it in there. Well, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services also confirmed that it was investigating a manufacturing defect in some initial coronavirus test kits that prompted some states to seek emergency approval to use their own test kits. Because of the decimation of that program in the CDC has these kits, and they have to approve the use of those kits. And today, Trump is meeting with Big Pharma to figure out how to gouge people. It's only $3,000 right now. Maybe they can make more. And you know they will. Well, let's get to our break. And when we get back from that break, we are going to go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Karen Hopkin. Making a cup of coffee isn't exactly rocket science, but a new study shows that a background in math and analytical chemistry doesn't hurt, because researchers who applied their skills in materials science and modeling to brewing espresso have made a grounds-breaking discovery. Contrary to popular belief, using fewer beans and a coarser grind will give you a more consistent shot. Their work appears in the journal Matter. If you're a coffee aficionado, you've no doubt noticed that some days you may get a great espresso. Other days, not so much. Even with the same coffee, the same machine, the same settings. To understand that variability, the researchers developed a mathematical model to explore how coffee is extracted or dissolved as water passes through the bed of grounds.
Basically, what we did was to start by writing down some equations which apply to just a single ground.
Jamie Foster, a senior lecturer in mathematics and physics at the University of Portsmouth.
So that's a less intimidating task because, in a real coffee bed, you've got millions and millions of particles that are all packed together in this very complicated way. And so a more tractable problem is to write down the equations on a single ground.
To model the entire coffee bed, Foster and his colleagues copied that equation millions of times, stirred in a bit more math, and then poured on the theoretical water.
The model tells us what we should expect in an ideal situation where all of the coffee is being contacted by all of the water equally.
Christopher Hendon, a computational chemist at the University of Oregon, who also took part in the study.
And indeed, the model describes reality very well for particular grind settings where there's a sufficient amount of large particles so that the water can flow freely through that bed. But when you grind sufficiently fine, that's when we started to see in real life a divergence from the expectation that the model was telling us.
With the fine grind, some shots were stronger than predicted, but some were considerably weaker, which flies in the face of conventional wisdom.
The thinking, if you want a stronger cup of coffee, is, well, I'll grind it finer because by doing that I'll have smaller particles in my grounds, and those smaller particles will have a higher surface area. And so this high surface area allows more rapid extraction from the grains.
But what the researchers found is,
if you kind of overdo the grinding, what ends up happening is that the particles are so small, in fact, that they kind of clog up the gaps where the water's trying to flow, and that actually hampers the extraction rather than helping it.
And the same is true for the amount of coffee you start with, so that less can counterintuitively end up tasting like more.
Since this article has come out, there has been a tremendous amount of activity on Twitter, arguing, discussing, just general excitement and interest in the project. And, independent of whether this helps make more reproducible coffee or not, this is a tremendous success that we have got millions of people to have read a scientific article and engage with science, but it's a great success for scientific literacy.
And we can all drink to that. Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Karen Hopkin.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
Can it really be a federal crime to save people who otherwise will die of dehydration and exposure? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. The United States government insisted that the answer is yes when it prosecuted individuals in Arizona who belonged to the Unitarian Universalist Church and its humanitarian aid organization ministry, No More Deaths, No Más Muertes. The members of No More Deaths leave supplies, food, water, and medicine in the Cabeza Prieta National Wildlife Refuge, which borders Mexico, along footpaths used by persons entering the United States without legal permission. It's one of the most extreme environments in North America and has no safe drinking water. According to the Pima County Medical Examiner, 2,816 sets of, quote, undocumented border crosser remains, end quote, were recovered in Arizona between 2000 and 2017. The defendants claim protection from prosecution under the Federal Religious Freedom Restoration Act. And on January 31st, the Federal District Court in Arizona found that their religious beliefs were sincere and that prosecuting them by the government was not necessary to achieve the government's legitimate goals. The court rejected the government's final justification that more deaths could mean fewer crossings as gruesome logic, totally speculative, and unsupported by evidence. The court then dismissed the criminal charges of driving and being and leaving water in the refuge in a victory for conscience and religious freedom in America. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1807. That was the day that President Thomas Jefferson signed legislation outlawing the transatlantic slave trade from bringing enslaved Africans to the United States. At the drafting of the U.S. Constitution, the authors had decided to revisit the question of slavery after 2 decades. During those 2 decades, the dedicated work of abolitionists put pressure on Congress to act against the barbaric transatlantic trade. Abolitionists in Great Britain also passed a law prohibiting the trade that same year. The U.S. law went into effect on January 1st of 1808. When the law was passed, 1 million enslaved people lived in the United States. The act, however, did not release them from bondage. In fact, the western spread of the cotton economy after the Louisiana Purchase ensured that slavery would become even more entrenched. The 1807 Act also did not fully end the transatlantic trade. The law did not include adequate enforcement mechanisms. Historians estimate that illegal smugglers brought in as many as 250,000 more enslaved Africans to the United States after the Prohibition was passed. In 1810, President James Madison spoke to Congress about the problem, saying, "It appears that American citizens are instrumental in carrying on a traffic in enslaved Africans, equally in violation of the laws of humanity and in defiance of those of their own country." It would become more than half a century until the question of slave labor in the United States was finally answered by a bloody civil war. From 1525 to 1866, the best estimates of historians is that 12.5 million Africans were brought to the Americas, and nearly 2 million of them died on the Middle Passage. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
This is Solidarity News on Radio Labour.
This is a Radio Labour report recorded on Monday, March 2nd, 2020. I'm Mark Boulanger. One of the most effective ways of addressing unemployment and underemployment, especially for women, is to develop what has been called a care economy. Caring for children, the elderly, the sick, and other people would greatly increase job opportunities. The International Trade Union Confederation has estimated that millions of new jobs could be created if care economy projects were implemented. The ITUC is the body which represents national union centers at the world level. Another organization promoting the growth of care economies is the International Labour Organization. The ILO is the specialized agency of the United Nations concerned with work in the world. It has produced a video about care economies and what they could do to increase decent work.
Care is at the heart of humanity. Throughout the course of our lives, each and every one of us will rely on the care of others. As the world's population grows and as it ages, so will the demand for care. Mothers, fathers, and other family members are most often the primary caregivers. But children, especially girls, also help to care for the youngest and oldest members of their families and help with household chores. The responsibility for care sits mainly on the shoulders of women and girls, and often on those from disadvantaged racial and ethnic groups. Domestic workers play a key role in caregiving. Often they are poorly paid and operate outside the formal economy. Girl domestic workers have less access to education and see their own opportunities severely hampered as a result. Migrant domestic workers leave their families behind in search of work, often displacing care to other family members. And while they may benefit from moving from rural to urban areas or to different countries, they need to be aware of their rights and protected from exploitation. Formal paid jobs in care services are mostly in early childhood education, social work, healthcare services, disability care, or long-term care for the elderly. But care work is undervalued all over the world, and even when paid, is often underpaid. Where there are challenges, there are opportunities. The care economy of the future should generate more decent jobs in public and private sectors that could be well remunerated. Care cooperatives, like domestic workers' co-ops or daycare set up by the parents themselves, are growing. In seizing this chance to create care jobs, we can also smooth the way for many more women to join the workforce in all fields and contribute their talent to the social and economic growth of their countries. But to do so, care contributions need to be measured, recognised and valued. Caregivers should also have a voice and be represented in decision-making. Care needs to be redistributed fairly. Getting more men into decent care jobs will also promote gender equality. And it needs to be reduced by better investment in social and household infrastructure. We need to share the care between women and men at home so they can both seek decent work and provide for their families. And with employers, who increasingly recognise their role in contributing to care solutions. Governments have a responsibility to provide quality care jobs, services and policies to ensure that both the providers and the beneficiaries of care are protected. Our common goal to nurture and care for our families and communities creates a universal bond that underpins our pursuit of a fair and prosperous future.
And that's it. International labor news you can use. Thank you for listening. And remember, it's all about global solidarity.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy River City Hash Mondays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 31 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a high in the mid-50s. Cloudy early with peaks of sunshine expected late. Winds will remain light and variable today and tonight with a few passing clouds. Later on tonight with a low around 35. Tomorrow a few clouds early, otherwise mostly sunny with a high around 65. And winds will remain light and variable. Well. We do have snow, a mix of snow for Friday and Saturday in the forecast. Always subject to change because it is so far out now, isn't it? Pollen is rated at none. Air quality index locally is good at 23 parts per million, and the daytime UV index is moderate, though it has ticked up a degree to 4. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.41 inches. Visibility is up to 10 miles, and relative humidity is at 77%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. Rome is 57 and mostly cloudy, but that's before London. We always start with London. London is 48 and partly cloudy, and then Paris is 48 and mostly cloudy, and then Rome is 57 and mostly cloudy. Kyiv is 41 with a light rain. Kabul is 50 degrees and fair. Hong Kong is 62 and mostly cloudy. Tokyo is 46 and partly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 70 degrees and partly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 54 and sunny. And New York is 50 degrees Fahrenheit and fair. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. David McHugh of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A warm winter means that for apparently the first time in the history of German winemaking, the country's fabled vineyards will produce no ice wine, a pricey golden nectar made from the grapes that have been left to freeze on the vine. The German Wine Institute said that none of the country's wine regions saw the necessary low temperature of 19 degrees Fahrenheit. A succession of warm winters have cut into ice wine production recently. Only 7 producers managed to make it in 2017, and only 5 managed it in 2013. If warm winters become more frequent over the coming years, ice wines from Germany's region will soon become an even more expensive rarity than they already are, said Wine Institute spokesman Ernst Bücher. I'm sure he was rubbing his hands at the prospect. I know I would. Bücher said the Institute knew of no vintage year in the century or last when no ice wine was made, and since winters were colder in the 19th century, it assumed that the latest harvest was the first ones to create no ice wine since production began in 1830. Canada's Niagara Peninsula is one of the several other places where ice wine is produced, thanks to its cold winters. It's also made in northern Michigan and Ashtabula County, Ohio, near Lake Erie. Major markets for German ice wine include Japan and China, as well as the Scandinavian countries and the U.S.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Anonymous worker bees at Reuters bring us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. China could face a desert locust invasion, a government body warned today, Monday, urging local authorities to prepare for the possible arrival of the voracious insects from neighboring Pakistan and India. Well, they ought to build a wall. The risk of swarms entering the country is low, which means it's high, although China will be hampered in tracking the locusts by a lack of monitoring techniques and little knowledge of migration patterns. Well, what you don't know can't hurt you. Look how Trump is attending to the coronavirus. If you never test anybody, nobody will be sick. Locust swarms could enter the Tibet region from Pakistan and India, or the southwestern province of Yunnan through Myanmar, depending on climate conditions. Authorities in the western region, which also borders Pakistan, said mountains and the absence of tropical and subtropical deserts have reduced the chances of locusts migrating into the area. Oh, really? Then it means that it has increased the possibility. You can't trust what these people say. I think that locust outbreaks are the next pestilence to hit us. Then what? Little poisonous frogs falling from the sky? Could be. Customs at Kunjareb, a pass between China and Pakistan in southwestern Xinjiang, have started monitoring surrounding areas within 2 kilometers for locusts. They are inspecting or sterilizing vehicles and goods crossing the border, targeting locust adults that might come along, or soil and plants that contain the insect eggs. The desert locusts have already ravaged crops and pastures in several countries in East Africa, and swarms have spread into India and Pakistan. Really now? Now, locust swarms can fly up to 90 miles a day with the wind, and adult insects can consume roughly their own weight in fresh food per day. Local forestry and grassland administrations must fully be aware of the extreme importance of prevention and control work against locusts, a government body said. They should store pesticides and equipment and have personnel ready to take immediate and effective measures once locusts are detected. Well, I would say build a wall. That brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day. But you do know Netroots Radio is going to broadcast on, and we will meet up tomorrow for Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théères, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.